Welcome back to Mining Pod. On today's show, we're joined by Philip Salter, the CTO of Genesis, one of the world's largest private miners. So it's great to have them on the show. We often have public mining companies and others on the show. So it's great to get an insider's perspective of a large private Bitcoin miner. This is a takeover podcast, so we'll be joined by Taylor and Mark to conduct the interview. A great conversation on mining war stories from Philip, and then we go into immersion tech and how Genesis thinks about Bitcoin mining as a private company. From there, we'd like to encourage everyone to go subscribe to either our YouTube channel, our LinkedIn page, or our newsletter. Newsletter is blockspace.media. You can sign up there and get new emails to your inbox about twice a week. We're pushing that pretty hard going into next year. Thanks for tuning in. First, a quick word from our sponsor for this mini-series, Foreman Mining, and then on to the podcast. Hey listeners, let's talk about revolutionizing your mining operation with Foreman. This isn't your average management tool. It's an all-in-one solution for reducing costs and significantly boosting your revenue. Foreman brings a cutting-edge dashboard to your fingertips, empowering you with automated energy strategies. This means not only curtailing around real-time prices, but also strategically enhancing your profit margins through demand response. It's about leveraging energy efficiency to its fullest potential. With Foreman, you get a system that scales with your business. Inventory management for assets, infrastructure integration, and business intelligence. Foreman elevates the cash flow and production of your entire operation. To see how Foreman can redefine your mining operation standards, visit foreman.mn.
Welcome back to the third episode of the Mining Pod Takeover with Taylor and Mark from Vanish. Today we have a wonderful guest, Philip Salter, current CTO over at Genesis Mining. Thank you for joining us today, Philip. Can you tell us a little bit about who Philip Salter is, where you're currently working out of, and just the basics on who you are?
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invite. I'm joining from Munich, Germany. I'm actually CTO of Genesis Digital Assets, not Genesis Mining anymore. That's been a couple of years back. And very happy to be here, talk about all the mining stuff.
Well, cool. Well, you're now the CTO of one of the largest mining companies. Can you talk to us about how you made your path into Bitcoin mining or maybe blockchain in general?
Yeah, so I've actually been in the mining game for quite a while. I mined a Bitcoin on GPU back in 2011 and thought it was super fascinating, was super into it, but didn't have any money to buy the first ASIC. So I stopped mining then after that. It took me half a year to mine that one Bitcoin, and it never really mined a private coin again after that, because here in Germany, the power prices are so high. But yeah, after university, I was looking directly for something to do with Bitcoin. I was just looking around what exists to do with Bitcoin, and I kind of stumbled upon the Genesis Mining guys and joined them as software developer. So I come in from the software development side. I've got a background in business software development, and so I started off. 1 month later, I found myself flying to Iceland to the mining farms that we were building back then, end of 2014, that is, and kind of really loved it. The mix of hardware, and obviously I was doing the software part, but seeing the hardware also and actually having something real to look at that the work is impacting, that's awesome. That's awesome. Much better than just the normal office job. So I never really looked back. Genesis Mining up until 2021, and then GDA up to present.
No, that's fantastic, right? And so you jumped right into leaving college and looking for something in Bitcoin. Was there a moment in college that got you interested in Bitcoin, like that orange pill moment for you? Where did that happen? I guess we skipped a step there in the process.
Oh yeah, gotta think. No, I got into Bitcoin before university, so I was in high school. Oh yeah. Torrenting. Like, a friend of mine was asking me about torrents, and it made me kind of look into all this decentralized technology, like peer-to-peer, right? I had no idea what that meant. And just kind of reading about it and looking around a bit, I stumbled upon Bitcoin. And I thought it was like what? Like money and peer-to-peer, like no server, strange stuff. And that really got me interested, and I started looking into it. And that's when I downloaded that the miner and mined on the GPU. So, yeah.
You know what's funny? That just reminded me, one of my first purchases with Bitcoin was, do you remember the private trackers for torrents, and you need
Yeah.
like to pay to get in. And Bitcoin was like the only thing these guys would take, in the early 2011, 2012 to get for the
Wow.
invites. I completely forgot about that till you said that. So another question that we were discussing this earlier. You've been in mining for several years now, and things have changed. And looking back on things, things have changed quite a bit. But what gets you excited these days? Like what stands out that what piques your interest now that you've been in this field for a while?
The interesting part that I've been noticing over the years, it's been, what has it been, 9 years, is that I've always had the kind of the luck and opportunity or whatever to be part of the teams building some of the large farms at that point in time. So back in the days when I was talking about Iceland, right, we were installing, I think, 150 or so, or 200 S5 machines. Right, S5 miners, they had the soft case, and you had to be careful not to crunch them and so on.
Were these the ones that beeped? Or was that the S1?
Say again?
Are these the ones that had a speaker that beeped? Or is that the S1?
Oh, man.
There was one miner back in the day that was just...
The miners have always been loud, right? They've always been loud, but beeping, yeah. So some of them beeped when they lost internet.
Yes,
which happens way too often. Yeah.
And that's, yeah, okay. They don't do that anymore, but okay. Sorry.
And those were also the miners that kind of made the Spondulis miners obsolete, which were there before. And they were amazing miners, great machines, perfect engineering. I loved them until I left the garage door open once. And then we had a power outage overnight. And then all the miners kind of, got humidity in them and exploded the next morning. That was not good. But yeah, the S5 miners. But anyway, what I was saying, that I've always had the luck to be there when the kind of large mining farms of that time got created. So back then there was 150 miners, and then we did build outs of 4 megawatts of GPUs, and then later we did much larger, like over 100 megawatt ASIC farms, and then now we're of course like scratching the limit of that. And it's always very interesting to see the technology around surrounding the whole mining actually develop, right? Like I think when people think about the development of Bitcoin mining, they always look at the ASIC efficiency and looking at TSMC and the chip efficiency, and who can use the newest node process and so on, and that's all great. But just from actually working with the technology, I find just like the software infrastructure around it so interesting, and the evolution of data center design that we see in Bitcoin over time. Back in the day, people just putting a roof over something in the middle of the whatever steps and just mining for 3 months, and all the devices are broken. That's not happening anymore, right? Now you have to, like, the data centers have gotten much more professional.
Well,
I just love that, the evolution.
It's funny. I was just the other day looking back on YouTube, looking at Bitcoin mining farm builds from like 2013, 2014, and it is hilarious where big air conditionings, or big air conditioners for the miners, and like the build outs are so, you would never see it today, and it's just
horrible. Yeah,
extremely expensive for what the cookie cutter designs that you could do now that work just fine.
But not even just like expensive versus cheap. I think that's a huge one. That's really a huge one. How much money people are now putting into the infrastructure. That's huge. But also just the design quality. Like back then, you just had people that were mining in their garage, with whatever 10 kilowatts or something, getting an infusion of money. Like they got some investor, like some rich friend that gave them $10 million, and they go, "I'm going to build this huge farm for you. Give me the money. I'm the nerd. You know me. I won't cheat you. I'll build this huge thing." And they do. And it overheats after 10 minutes. And then they have downtime for months trying to solve the problems, right? It's just complete amateur hour back in the day. And that was great fun, right? It was great. We were all part of it. But nowadays,
it was okay because nobody had a clue back then.
Yeah, of course. Nowadays, people are hiring the people from the data center industry, and making them, convincing them to lower their requirements a bit to get to the slightly lower mining requirements. But back then it was like, let's just wire these cables differently. I think it will work. It was a different time.
Yeah. there's been a lot of development on the data center side. I think like a really good point is if you were to look at the garage miners of 2012 to 2013 and compare that to a Bitfury immersion site, the Azerbaijan site with the integrated backplanes and two-phase cooling in 2017, the steps have came like in massive leaps, right? Where do you see the lack of innovation? Like, where do you think operators aren't focusing their time or are losing efficiency? Like, where is the innovation not happen? Like the data centers, the miners, it's all came a long way. What are people missing?
Oh, I think it's a pretty clear one, and that's just the connection between the miner designs and the data center designs, and we're seeing that gap being closed kind of around now, I guess. If we talked now, a year ago, I wouldn't have said that, but I think now we can say that the gap is slowly closing, with like the manufacturers coming out with an official immersion design for their miners, for example. But it's always been a kind of pain point that the devices that you got from the manufacturer were just like you get what you see. That's all you get, and you'd better build a data center around that. Doesn't matter what would be the most ergonomic. And whenever a mining producer, interestingly, whenever a hardware producer tried to change that and said, no, let's use a standard form factor, let's do 16-inch, the rack mount thing or so, then those never survived. I'm not sure. I don't think that was the reason they didn't survive, but none of the manufacturers that try to do it like that, none of them survived.
Well, I was going to
The
say,
only ones that survived were the shoebox designs. So,
what are your thoughts on the Bitfury ones? The 6U rackable, upgradable.
okay, Bitfury survived, but they haven't been selling to the public market for so long, so they've been kind of secret.
But I think they did it right. Like
No, I like it.
Like, hey, I don't need to buy a whole new machine. Throw away the old hash boards, get new ones, plug it in.
Great. Yeah.
But you're right. Otherwise, you just get what you get from Bitmain or Witsminer, and
it's even similar now. I mean, now we have this very standard double tube shoebox design, right? Very standard, but not when you're actually got a CAD design for like a sheet with like holes cut out and then like produced by a manufacturer down to the millimeter. Because if you get a slightly different version, like the fans will be like slightly off, or the control board will be like 1 centimeter shorter or something, just something that makes them slightly incompatible. So even though we have this standard, it's still like rough around the edges and not really being followed because no one actually defined it as a standard. So it's just a little bit frustrating whenever you have to change your hardware out. Then again, nowadays, how often do you really change out your miners for new ones? It doesn't happen all the time, every couple of years.
Yeah, and I do agree with you, right? Like the miner producers, there's a lot to be gained there in the form factor and the design of the machines. How do you feel about companies like Witsminer and Aerodyne and Chain Reaction, some of these new providers, and obviously Witsminer being an old provider, producing machines for immersion in hydro or air? Is that what you're leading into, is being able to have more flexibility with your design profile depending on what you're building, whether it's immersion or liquid to chip or air cooled?
Well, I think it's cool. I think it's cool because it allows more flexibility for different kind of climates. I think Bitcoin mining came from a time, or the current design, the air-cooled designs, I should say, came from a time when all the mining was de facto happening in China and not so much outside. And so everything was just made for the Chinese climate, especially like Sichuan and the steppes and so on, where you can cool with air pretty easily. Like it doesn't get to 40 degrees, the humidity isn't too bad, and it's kind of all right. And even if it was not all right, the lifetime of the machines was super short, like 6 to 12 months. So even if they have a high failure rate, it doesn't matter. But nowadays we're mining in other climate zones, right? Texas, everyone's talking about Texas, where you have these super hot summers and windy also. And, we're talking about places like Nordics, like Iceland, Sweden, Canada, for example. I think the market share of those has risen a bit. And then we also now have more tropical regions, right? People are talking about Indonesia, talking about South America, different places there that all have a very humid climate and very hot. And for those, just that air-cooled design just isn't always perfect. I mean, it's a good design, but not always perfect. So I think it's good that the machine manufacturers are listening to the users and are creating these other versions that are officially endorsed, so you're not voiding the warranty anymore. And I'm kind of looking forward to see if any of those cooling systems is going to like die out. Like, is air cooling going to die out? Is hydro or is immersion going to die out? Will we really go to two-phase? So I don't have the answers. I don't know, but asking the questions is great fun, right? What do you guys think?
I mean, obviously, in my perspective, I think, open bath immersion is the way to go with current chip densities and the designs of the machines. And in the current year, I think single phase is the best way to go. Obviously, as chip densities increase and all those things, I do think two phase will make its way back into the realm, not only for immersion, not only for crypto mining, but also for the data center. At the end of the day, it is the most effective way to cool a computer that we've found. So I think we'll just naturally chase efficiencies and get there. But the problem with two phase, obviously, the fluid and everything like that needs a little bit of work, right? So it's a technology that still needs development, but still very passionate about it and very hopeful that it will make a comeback. What about you, Mark?
I mean, I'm that weird one who says each one of these has a place. I love air cooled. It's cheap. It works. It works pretty darn well in human environments. A little bit of conforming spray on the intake side, and now you don't have to worry about humidity shorting out components. Just when the component breaks, it's just a nightmare to not repair. But really like the water blocks, the hydros. I remember back when the S9 hydro was a thing. I thought that was a great design. And I like now that we're getting like containers from Bitmain coming pre plumbed up and everything. Not a big fan of the water chillers that they use, the water towers. I think a closed loop is a better solution, just because like if you're in Texas, you might not be in a big enough house. You might not even have water. You know what I mean? Some of these farms are really remote. But the heat recapture and reuse is pretty awesome. I mean, I think that's where a huge benefit is. And then immersion, of course, if you have good power rates, your machines tend to last longer. You can push them harder. Your general repair and maintenance is close to non-existent. And then you could also still do a dual loop and use heat recapture as well. But you're going from the cheapest is air. Then you go to water block. Water blocks isn't really cheap either. But
well, if you have to modify them to do your own water blocks, that sounds a bit horrible.
Oh yeah, no, it was.
I'm finished.
Yeah, well, back in the day, there was a Bitmain S9 Hydro, and then for the 17 series, it didn't make one. But on Alibaba, you could find these vendors that made just like the generic, like just like not even die cut, like machine cut water blocks. They're horrible, but they worked. I mean, they worked pretty well because water's better than air. But yeah, it wasn't made for scale. But now you have these really big hydro farms. Like I think Merkel's big. I don't know how big, but I've seen photos, and that's a pretty big hydro farm. But it's not as widespread. Like in North America, there's not a lot of people that do it, and I'm curious why.
Well, having high pressure water around electronics, having 2 megawatts shoved into a container with water lines all over it is obviously a high risk item, right? There's multiple leak points, and it's just not exactly, in my opinion, the way forward. But I guess we'll see what wins out in the long term. And while we're on this topic, this is an interesting one for you, Philip, because you're an international guest, which is awesome. There's a big topic in America right now about producing miners in America, designing miners in America, really being able to stop the reliance on our Chinese providers. Do you find that to be like something that you worry about or your company worries about, or is that something that just is mostly like a American company issue, right? From my point, I think the bigger issue is everything's made at TSMC or Samsung, and our reliance on those two foundries is actually the issue. But wanted to bring this up to an international guest and get your opinion on it.
Huh. Yeah, it's a good point that even, no matter where the miner is manufactured, the chips are going to come from TSMC or Samsung. So I guess that TSMC and Intel are building facilities outside of China at the moment. It's more like announcements, not like finished thing. And we're not sure if the cost point per chip will be the same in these Western facilities that TSMC is building. But yeah, anyway, on the short term of the horizon, definitely the chips are coming from Taiwan and Korea anyway. So I'm not sure. I think it's a natural evolution of just cutting down on logistics, import taxes, kind of global policy topics of the US are involved in this topic as well. And since America gained so much importance in Bitcoin mining just over the last, since 2020, I guess, it's a natural evolution for this to start coming to America too. It's also natural that it didn't happen earlier, right? Because if like only a fraction of miners are in the US, What was it before? I don't remember the number, 5% or 10 or something. Then of course, like, it's not going to be worth it to manufacture there, and in the worst case, having to export to other countries. But as it gets bigger, it makes perfect sense. Also, I find it very interesting to see how the supply chain is going to adjust to that. Talking about repair shops, about warranty, about like facilities inside the US to be able to repair miners and bring them back with a shorter turnaround. That's been a major pain point of, let's say, not being in the Chinese region, just because you have to wait for 4 to 6 weeks for the repair instead of a week. Inside China, everything's amazingly fast. So now I see it as a natural evolution, but yeah, of course, the bottom line is just like you said, Taylor, that the chips still come from TSMC and Samsung. So unless they build facility in the West or something like that changes, there won't be a fundamental change, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can design them in America all day long, but if they're still getting made in Taiwan and we still have the risk of the Chinese invasion, we're really not pulling out a lot of risk out of the supply chain, right? I guess is my point. And it's
and it's not
interesting.
just the chips either. It's like also the packaging of the chips is also done close to the foundries for obvious reasons. And lots of the microelectronics or even the components of the electronics come from China anyway. Everything's in China. You can't get away from China. You don't want to get away from China, right? We, over the last, 30, 40 years or something, we've moved all the factories to China. So complaining now that they're in China is not really, considering the history of how they got there in the first place. So everything's in China. And I don't think that I don't think that the the Bitcoin miners have any kind of political say in if they want to globally change the supply chain structure. That's not. We do Bitcoin, guys. We do Bitcoin. We don't do China.
Well,
So
what's funny is the manufacturers slowly are. You're right. Like the tariff. Bitmain started assembling in Malaysia. WhatsMiner now has facilities in the U.S. to assemble the miners in the U.S. to get around all the tariffs. So they're making it. I mean, they're doing it for profits, but it's just, well, do you think that these Chinese manufacturers having like extremely large market share in the Bitcoin mining ecosystem is a problem? Like, do you think we need, like, there's been a lot of talk with Auradine and some of these others that we need U.S. Chip designs for U.S. designed Bitcoin miners. Do you believe that we actually do need that, or do you think these Chinese manufacturers are just doing it as a business? Like, they don't care?
I've never been in a situation where these kinds of decisions were not made by an economic viewpoint, right? I think no one's going to pay $200 more for a miner just because it's in the US, not purely because of that. They might pay a little bit more, maybe almost nothing, but I don't think they'll pay significantly more unless they're forced to by the government from some regulations. So no, I don't think that it's the most important thing, sure. But it's very important to know that there's a fallback, right? There's a backup. There's something like being built slowly in the background. I mean, you can compare it to, I don't know, Microsoft Word versus OpenOffice, right? Like, no one uses OpenOffice if they can avoid it, but it's great to know that there's a free alternative and you could go there if it's, if you're willing to take the pain. Yeah, it's kind of fine. So I think it's a similar situation. And if anything were to happen in China and Taiwan, or even between the US and China, further worsening relations or something, it's good to know from the Bitcoin ecosystem point of view that there's a to know how long it would take to come back from that loss from China. And so I think it's good, and it's going to be natural evolution that this happens more and more. But I don't see an immediate threat on Bitcoin or something.
So how do you think these new manufacturers are going to not fail, right? You have these behemoths that have supply chain all figured out. They've been doing it since, they started the industry, basic mining. How do you think they're going to, capture market share and do all this while still turning a profit?
Yeah, well, I think there's probably two categories of these kinds of newcomers, right? The one category may be the one that has, made favorable investments during the Bitcoin hype, and they're well financed to bring out a product which is a huge initial cost and kind of push into the market and immediately be competitive. Those could even go the route of like these usual Silicon Valley companies that are just unprofitable for 20 years and hoping to beat the competition, and then they start making like meager profits after some time. Tesla. But there's the other category, I think, also, which is trying to do things differently than the Chinese manufacturers, right? It's known that in China, kind of R&D and production work might be very cheap, but it's labor intensive. And the labor prices are going up in China, and they have been for a long time now, right? And it's gotten to the point where it's serious. There's European countries that have a cheaper cost per hour than a Chinese worker. And that's not even news. That's like 10 years ago. So China is getting more and more expensive. And with the structures that they've set up, they're not super efficient in working time. So with more kind of technology, innovation, R&D, and just kind of, smart guys putting in the work, I think it's possible. And I kind of know this firsthand, by the way. So I know that it's possible to kind of be competitive with these Chinese manufacturers by being lean, by being the newcomer, by not being this behemoth that's hard to move, but by being agile and still small.
Can we talk about that, the thing you're working on?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I'm saying it in this kind of way because I've actually I've met these guys. Very, very interesting startup working on a Bitcoin chip in the US, from inside the US, fully US. And they've kept very, very small. They've really just put in the technical work, proving their technology, having all the simulations in place and everything they need to understand what technology they're actually developing. Not with massive funding, not like that. More like I don't want to say homegrown, but more like a small and careful startup, being careful with their cash and being careful when they, open their mouth in a big way until they actually have something to show and they can actually make a big impact. I respect them very much for this. So I've been kind of advising on the Bitcoin market side on what miners are looking for when they purchase machines, kind of some kind of estimations and calculations and stuff like that. I'm not actually the chip developer guy, for sure not. But very, very interesting projects that we see there. ZetaGig is the name, by the way. They're not ZetaGig, like Zeta hash, ZetaGig.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. But very, very, very interesting projects there. And I think it's just one of those examples, and I think there's probably more than one, but it's a great example for like a really promising startup, but just kind of waiting for the right moment to really pounce out. So as soon as we see the Bitcoin price increasing again, and there's actually a chance of proper fundraising and people making larger investments and thinking more in the future, I think like ZetaGig and other kind of similar startups have a great chance to just like jump out and actually maybe even jump out ahead of some of these Chinese behemoths.
Can you share any details about like performance of it or anything that might be new or innovative? I assume probably no, but I'll ask.
Yeah. So I don't think I want to share too much yet, but it's not because it's vaporware and like we're pretending that there's something huge. Well, there's actually not. I know that that's what it sounds like, but I just don't want to share too much because actually the ZetaGig is very close to a kind of a not breakthrough, but what's the right word? Like a big milestone where they're actually going to have the real chips in hand, testing them really like properly and not just estimations. So
how long has that been going on for?
Now. Huh?
So how long has that been going on for? Like the startup?
It's a fresh startup. It only got started early last year, and they already have the first test tape out of chips and going through testing them at the moment. Those were done on a bit of an older technology node to kind of as a proof of concept to see what the performance can be at that node, and then to when the proper structures and funding are in place, then to really go and invest the big money, the big bucks that you need to get into the newer technology nodes like TSMC 3 nanometers or so, right? So that's the kind of idea there, and I'm very, very hyped about it. I think I'm not a big friend of all this venture capital stuff, and like I was saying earlier, like being unprofitable for many, many years and then just getting more and more seed money. No, I think the better thing, the strategy I like more is to actually have a product in hand, like a prototype, and then go up with a prototype and raise money for that, and not like raise money just with words. So that's why I don't want to say too much, because we're quite close to that point, and we might as well now wait a couple of weeks more and then have those numbers in hand.
Will you publicize those numbers once you have them? In a few months, would it be public?
Yeah, I think so. Like, that's another thing, right? Why keep everything secret and don't talk about anything, right? Like, a company's looking for customers, right? If you don't want to advertise your product, you probably don't really have too much. I don't know, of course we want to go out public with it and kind of spread the word, because really the business case here is to have something ready to go, but in a very small, lean kind of way, but to have it ready to go when the market conditions are right. Right now, all the ASICs are being dumped on the market for, what did I see yesterday? Avalon 90 terahash for $3 per terahash? Ridiculous. I mean, basically, we're at that point again where miners are just being given away for free. So it's very hard to it's very hard to think about the future. It's so long in the future to actually make those investments.
Yeah. So Phil, you've been in the space I think almost 4 years longer than I have, and in my time, I've watched, let's call it 10 ASIC companies come to market and fail. What do you think, just besides being small and lean, that these companies like Aerodyne, the company that you're working with, Chain Reaction, can do to be more successful, right? I mean, we've watched Cointerra and all these other companies come and fail, some big, some small. Do you think there's a recurring theme why they're not able to be sustainable at the market?
I just mentioned Cointerra, and there was also Spondulis, like I mentioned earlier, right? These were actually successful companies. They weren't startups that failed before they brought out a product. They failed after they had a product, even though, you should say. And I think customer trust is a very big point, right? If you pre-sell miners and then you don't deliver them, that's very bad. That's very bad. And that's probably what you missed in those 4 years, because that's what happened. That was happening a lot. There's that, and then it's just like, the Bitcoin market is brutal, right? It's a perfect worldwide competition on who can produce the coins the cheapest based on hardware and power price. So it's brutal, right? If you have these big players that are selling lots of machines, they undercut you, just cut down your price. And the only way to keep up will be to have those very large production numbers like they have, to have the efficiencies of scale. And as a startup, you won't have those, right? So Bitmain prices their products, for example, extremely aggressively, trying to just price out newcomers from the market, trying to not have them generate any sales, and then they lose their money, and then they're bankrupt, and then Bitmain is on top again, right? And it's not unfair. It's just the way the world works. So I think what newcomers have to look out for is not to directly go head on head with the big guys, and not try to fill the same niche and come out with this with the quote of trying to destroy them or anything like that, because it's just unrealistic. It's better to fill some kind of niches. It's better to be better at some certain things that are important to people, and to build a core customer base and build the trust.
So with that being said, being an operator like yourself, what would be something that they could do that would open your eyes to a new mining manufacturer that you've never worked with, and start building that trust? Is it a feature set? Is it a warranty? What would make you jump as a CTO to say, I'll try this new product. I'll put my name on the line for my company?
So I think, okay, it's a difficult question to ask, I think there's a couple of metrics that are important for machines, and they're going to be important for any machine, right? How good is the stability? What's the price? What's the efficiency? How good is support? What kind of help can I get with it? How flexible is it? What's the warranty terms? What's the features of the firmware? Can I change the firmware? Are there custom firmwares available? Right? I think there's the same kind of parameters for all the different firmware, not firmwares, for all the different miners. And I think you just have to be really good at a couple of them, especially the things related to customer service. I think that's very important, because I'm very, very used to buying new machines from a new manufacturer, getting the shipment 2 weeks too late, having a 10% broken rate, and the support doesn't answer, only in Chinese, and saying no. So that's just the standard customer experience that you have in the mining world when you work with a new company, right? So no one wants that, so everyone goes to the existing companies. You have to be trustworthy. You have to like actually try to help your customers to have 100% of the machines working, not 95%, right? If I buy miners and then after 2 weeks 95% are working, I've paid 5% more. That's probably the kind of discount that was the reason to make the purchase in the first place, right? Oh, we're 5% cheaper. So that's not good.
This is also probably the only industry where like you kind of expect that to happen.
Of course you expect it to happen, but it's really shitty. We're
Yeah.
still in a world where it's normal to expect 5 to 10% of your machines not to be mining for various reasons. Excel table times 0.9. Come on. How long has Bitcoin mining be around? Like, why is that still standard?
I think we should give the providers some credit over the last couple of years, though. I think the uptime, the consistency of the machines, the failure rates have greatly improved over the last couple of years. Like for us, for example, we've had tremendous success over the last 2 years with our provider in comparison to some of my previous experience, especially with some of the earlier generation machines that we've been talking about a little bit here. Maybe jumping out of the machines a little bit. You've really operated all over the world, have a really diverse career. How do you see like the regulatory policies changing, since your time in Bitcoin? And do you see any differences between what you're seeing in America and what you're seeing in Europe? Obviously, there's some obvious ones, but maybe some details that the normal provider wouldn't see.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've had the experience several times of being one of the first companies that goes to a country. Sorry, so it's happened to us several times that we've gone to a country that didn't really have mining before, and then we started mining there and saw the whole evolution of people not knowing what mining is up until people being unhappy with mining. So that's been interesting, right? That was especially the Nordic countries. That happens in these places where there's like an abundance of power and no one can sell it. So when you come as a Bitcoin miner and say, hey, we want all these megawatts, and they're like, what megawatts? It's amazing. And it starts off very, very positive. But then as more and more power is used, the electricity prices go higher and higher. In Iceland, that was the case, at least not for the residential power. We never impacted the power price of consumers, but like the corporate rate went a bit up and so on. And there's taxes, I think, were also added. So the evolution there in the regulatory structure was kind of a bad one, right? Like good in the beginning and then getting worse and worse as people think that Bitcoin miners are using too much of their precious power and not bringing enough to the local community or so. But in other places, like now Texas, I think I'm seeing more of the opposite, which is very interesting. So Bitcoin mining starting off as like, oh, it's an environmental hazard and whatever, using too much power. And then actually, there's all these discussions now happening for the last couple of years, like, hey, actually, we can balance our grid power with Bitcoin mining. And actually, we can, the power providers can make a bit more money by selling power when no one else wants it. And it doesn't actually increase the fees for the customers at all. So everyone's kind of happy. And also it's like bringing industry to West Texas, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more like a positive change that I'm seeing there. Hasn't quite arrived at high level politics yet, from what I hear. So I haven't heard, the federal government talking positively about Bitcoin mining yet or so. So it's not quite that clear yet, that development, but I do see it happening. And I even see it happening more and more in other places of the world where when Bitcoin mining becomes more established as like a plug and play solution for inconsistencies in the power grid, and maybe even to balance out like power spikes caused by environmental green technologies or turning off power during power dips to regulate the market. I even see Bitcoin mining kind of seeping into countries where there's been usually no Bitcoin mining at all. For example, Germany, because of the high power prices. I think basically wherever the regulation can allow it, they will see the benefits of having power users like Bitcoin in their systems. And I think it's a positive outlook from the regulatory side.
Yeah, and we've watched, mining leave China and move to the United States. As you said, you started in Iceland. It's all over the place. Where do you think like the next big groundbreaking will be, right? Like there's a massive concentration of hash right now in Texas that's moved from all over the world. There's lots of
Mm.
people talking about Africa and South America. Is there something or a place in the world that you're excited about that people aren't really mining that you want to go to or think it'd be valuable to go there?
Uh, I don't have a nice answer for you, Taylor. I don't think so. I don't have like a place that I'm waiting for it to happen. But I do think generally that it's going to be places that have huge untapped environmental resources. For example, some kind of deserts where there's going to be huge solar installations, or something close to large offshore wind farms that that are not so densely populated, so you can put mining farms there. I really see the Bitcoin mining integrating more and more with power generation. So I think as power generation moves out to these, to these places, that Bitcoin miners will go close to them. I think that makes sense. For example, large renewable projects partnering up with Bitcoin miners before the project even starts, but to have Bitcoin mining as part of their business plan. I see that happening for sure. So I guess from that standpoint, like Australia could be good, right? Because they've got so much sun, so much desert, and no Bitcoin mining right now. So that can only grow from there. It can't get worse. And who knows? Maybe some places in the Nordics where there's lots of wind farms being built, like England or so.
What are your thoughts? And this just popped in my mind because I don't know if you know Edward Evanson used to be at Brains. He now is. I'm just looking it up. He is the
I know
chief
Edward. Yeah,
officer at Reformed Energy, where they're doing
yeah,
like landfills. I think that's pretty smart. Like, hey, we got landfills. It's land that people don't want to use. You could mine some Bitcoin, generate some power, sell some land.
great. I love it.
I think it's great.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's really good.
So you can do mining in their hometown. Like I'm in Connecticut. We are like one of the top 5, I think, most expensive states for power in the country because we don't produce anything. Everything's brought in. We're a small state. Only time I was able to mine Bitcoin was like the 2017 bull run because like you couldn't not make money. And I think some of these innovative ways of mining Bitcoin, the renewables, these landfills, or all this green energy, it also supplies power to the grid, which is like, it's like you're saying, people were like, oh, Bitcoin bad, but now it's like, oh, Bitcoin's, putting up the capex for renewable that helps everybody. So it's.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. That's a very American topic with these landfills. Like in Germany, we don't have landfills, right? All the rubbish that's supposed to go away is burnt. So I think they actually generate something with burning the trash. It's not like
cancer.
It's not, probably some of that too. No, but I don't think like you can burn it like coal and get tons of energy out, but I think you can get some out.
Well, yeah. So he was telling me through some of the stuff they're doing, like some of the byproducts, it's like jet fuel or diesel, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's this gasifying. Yeah, it's this
gasifiers.
Yeah, they're doing very cool stuff.
There's like a website you can go to, and it shows every single landfill in like the United States, and like, oh yeah, we got a lot of piles of trash.
Yeah,
like that's a Bitcoin. Otherwise, people would just be getting bigger and bigger.
It's a great concept. It's very, very cool.
Yeah. Have you seen any other cool concepts like that haven't really taken off yet, or are in their beginning stages?
Yeah, I'm thinking. You know what? What's their name? Stronghold. What Stronghold does is they also have the gasifiers, but they're gasifying like burnt coal. As I understand, I'm not like, quite sure what it is, but it's like
I think it's like the coal tailing. Like it's coal, and they're just tailings.
That's right. Yeah. Is it actually burnt coal, or is it like coal mixed with dirt, or like what is it actually?
I don't know. I'm just told it's green. I'm like, oh, it's green. Maybe it's greener.
I believe they're reusing already spent coal in a way that still produces energy. But maybe we can get one of those guys on the podcast and get some more details around that stuff. Another one, interesting one, is, do you guys know Nathaniel Harmon? He's working on some OFAC stuff, basically using the temperature difference in the ocean to generate electricity and therefore mine Bitcoin with the byproduct. That one's also a pretty interesting project.
How does that work?
He'd be a great person to bring on, but essentially keeping it super basic. I'm not an expert in this type of energy development, but it's utilizing temperature difference between the top of the ocean and the bottom of the ocean in order to produce power. Obviously, there's a lot of technical nuances in between what I just said, but that's generally what he's explained to me in the past couple times I've seen him at the conferences. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting project. And, Marathon's also working on a landfill project. So it's interesting to see not only innovation in the data center design space, the build, like the ASIC space, but also like where are you getting your power and how can you find it? I'm really interested in the nuclear side, right? Like the small modular reactors. Phil, what's your opinion on that? Is that something that you've been interested in, nuclear power, the modular reactors or anything like that?
I don't think that I know too much about that. I mean, I know about nuclear reactors, but not small modular ones. Sounds pretty cool. Like, sounds slightly dangerous too, but sounds pretty cool. No, I mean, I'm a big friend of nuclear. I think like Germany turned all of the nuclear off, and it's like horrible. And we're importing now nuclear power from France, which doesn't make any sense. So I like nuclear. I think it's a good mix between stable and green, I suppose. But I'm not sure about Bitcoin mining. I think when you talk, like, I don't like to directly connect the energy generation with Bitcoin. Like, I don't see it happening all that much. That energy producers will build that someone will build a power plant and build a mining farm, and that working forever. Because I think that it's going to be more profitable to build a power plant and sell the power to consumers. They pay more than Bitcoin miners, right? So I think Bitcoin mining fits into in the gap between consumers and power providers, like filling out those times when this power could be generated, but it's not being taken by the consumer, or some kind of mix, something like that. I'm not sure if it makes sense to build a nuclear power plant and then put 100 containers down.
Well, I wonder if nuclear power plants are like natural, because I know like natural gas power plants, they're more efficient the harder you run them. So I wonder if nuclear is the same. So it's like, oh, I can have a Bitcoin mining farm because the local community is only pulling 60% of the power. Let's make it 100% and then adjust based on, because I did learn that from somebody, and I was like, oh, that's actually pretty interesting.
That's interesting, yeah. So by increasing the power and mining more Bitcoin, you can make it more efficient for everyone.
For everybody, yeah.
That would be a great sell. I don't know about that. Yeah.
A question that
talking about another interesting application of mining that hasn't been tapped yet. I think we're really not tapping enough into the heating space. Like, there's projects that exists in, you've probably heard more than me, but I think it was Norway and Sweden, where you can integrate like immersion cooled farms with the local water grid, like the hot water grid.
Yeah, we actually have a client that reached out to me like 2 years ago. And he was from one of those countries, and he was like, yeah, we have an immersion farm, blah, blah, blah. He sends me a photo, and I'm looking at this thing, and I'm like, I don't understand. You're just like taking water from the water company and then putting it down the drain. And he was like, no. And I'm like, this is making, and he's explaining it to me. And I'm like, so you're telling me you have a hot water pipe from like the town? And he's like, yeah. He's like, the really, really big buildings, like the skyscrapers or like the towers, he's like, they have a hot water pipe that goes up and that heats the building. And I was like, blown away. And he's telling me that he's being paid to heat the water. And I'm like, holy crap, this is genius.
Yeah.
I think it's only like that part of the world, like, I don't know all too much, but I was blown away.
From Iceland, where they just spend so much time there, they have all these geothermal power plants, right? And the byproduct of geothermal power plants, who would have guessed, is hot water, right? They pump it all up, they put it through steam engines, but afterwards it's still super hot, like 80 degrees Celsius. Sorry, guys. 80 degrees Celsius, like super hot water, but it's not hot enough to turn a turbine. So what do they do with it? They give it out to the population, and it's incredible. They changed it now, but it used to be in Iceland that you paid for a hot water connection per month, a flat rate, and it was like $5. Like nothing. And everyone would have their hot tub outside, just bubbling all day, all night, because you just connect the hot the pipe to it. You're not being billed by volume, just being billed by having a connection or not having the connection. Amazing. They changed it now. Amazing though. And this makes sense also in other places, right? Especially where most of the power is being of the population is being burnt to actually heat people's homes, to just boil water. In America, you heat a lot with electricity, but we here heat with gas and oil, not generators, boilers in the basement. We all have a basement with like a gas or oil tank and thing, and like having a hot water connection is so much nicer for that, and also much more efficient because they generate the hot water in like these trash burning plants that I was talking about earlier, or geothermal or whatever, and then you get the connection. We don't have it here, but I think more places could have this if there was a nice centralized place where heat is being generated. So that's a good chance for mining.
A question I want to ask you, I've been asking all of our guests, what personal or professional lessons have you learned from your experiences in the Bitcoin mining community over the past however many years that you would like to share? And it could be anything. We've gotten some interesting ones.
So what professional opinions have I gotten?
Sorry, lessons you've learned, or lessons that you'd like to share.
Oh man.
We've heard some interesting
I've been in this for so long. You know, I started Bitcoin mining pretty much directly after college. I think most of the lessons that I've learned have been in this space. It's a bit difficult. Oh man, I don't know. I'm not sure if it counts as a lesson learned, but I found the most interesting thing that I think Bitcoin mining got me closer to, and that probably otherwise I wouldn't have had the chance for, is visiting all these really interesting places where there's not many people, right? Usually if you travel for leisure, you like going to oceans or something beautiful or so. Usually if you travel for business, you're going to some city. They'll look the same if you ask me. But with Bitcoin mining, I've always been traveling out to the middle of nowhere somewhere, meeting great people, like actually meeting the real local people, not like the city local, the real local people, and just getting to know all these cultures. So not sure that counts as a lesson learned, but that's maybe been the most insightful thing.
I think I know what you're like. You can meet. There are some of the nicest people in some of the most remote places that you would just never visit normally.
Yeah, you just never get there, and then everyone's nice because no one's used to like annoying tourists buying shitty hats and stuff, right? So, and everyone's happy for you to visit their city or so, and you can see something like the real, what the country's really like, and so on. I find it absolutely fascinating. I love it.
Yeah, I can really connect with that.
When I go to Dubai, for example, I don't go to the skyscrapers, but I go to the old part of Dubai with all the small flat houses and so on, because it's like the real deal.
No, and I can connect with that a lot. I mean, I got into Bitcoin after college as well. And I think the thing that's reoccurring to me that I enjoy the most about this is just building really cool projects and really cool technology with great people. And a lot of times you find those great people in the middle of nowhere, right? Like our Sandersville and Washington locations are extremely rural, and they have some of the best people you'll ever meet, little small town diners and stuff like that. You really just can't beat it. So I agree with you completely. Another thing that we wanted to ask is, like, as we wrap this up, is what does the future look like for Phil? Is Bitcoin mining going to be your end all be all for your whole career? Is there new technologies that are kind of starting to interest you that you might like get out of this industry? Where do you see the future going for Phil?
Well, I'm not sure. Let's see. I feel like I'm so deep into Bitcoin that it's kind of that, or start something completely new. No, I like mining. I think mining is great. I think mining is perfect. Looking at it from the software perspective, though, right? I'm always a software guy, but I think it's a really great position to find myself in, to be in this kind of corner between software, hardware, and people, like operations. That's like my main areas where I'm included, and that's a really special mix. It's like, I don't think you get that mix in too many places.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. You got a similar role in getting to see the way that the software interacts with the hardware, and then how the people are, taking care of the sites and making everything work. It's pretty special, especially the building aspect for me. I love seeing the new sites come together, seeing the electricians, the networking teams, cooling teams, all putting together the pieces of the puzzle to make a site successful is really cool. So
exactly, everything seems so easy on paper, but then when it's really happening, that's when it gets really interesting once more.
And then once it's done and you just look at it and you're like, damn, we built this and it's a monster.
It always is. But I'm always thinking like, come on, we probably could have done a little bit better. Because, you know, with every builder that we do of all the time, we always try to get a bit better, right? Fix that, make this a bit nicer, listen from that. But, you know, the projects always are so big and they have to be on schedule, right? It's not like, 6 months delay, not like a government project or something. So they really have to be finished. So it feels like being a software guy, it feels like more stuff could have been fixed in between the versions. But on the hardware side, things move a bit slower. So I always got more things in my mind that we should be fixing the next time and should be improving the next time. And so, yeah, I think that journey is not going to end anytime soon.
Well, I think that mindset's why you're the CTO of one of the largest mining companies in the world, right? Constantly improving day after day is a good way to go. So
always talking about problems.
That's cool. Well, I think that wraps up the episode for us. We really appreciate you coming on, Phil, and hopefully the best of luck to both you and your company's future.
Thank you very much for having me. That was great fun.
Yeah, no, it was really cool. And it's awesome to see you. I haven't seen you since that day in the parking lot in TMG. Talked a little bit on Telegram and stuff. So it's really good to reconnect and get your opinions on this stuff. You know, you've got a lot of experience and a really good pedigree in the industry. So it's awesome to be able to get opinions from somebody with the stature like yourself. So we've had some really good guests and this was a great episode.
Likewise. I always like to hear, like, it's very important for me to connect with the people from like the community. And I've missed a conference or two, so I feel a bit out of the loop. So just this conversation has been already what I need to keep me going.